The war had lasted 6 years, and in all that time, the Corvette Dominion had never once feared a human fleet. They had good reason not to. Human ships were slow. Human ships were loud, in every sense that mattered to a species that read the universe through gravity waves and drive signatures. A Corvette scout could see a human battle group coming from 3 light hours away, yawn, and still have time to set up an ambush. Human hulls were thick but crude, built from simple alloys instead of grown crystal lattice. Human weapons hit hard, but hit slow. Human engines pushed ships forward the old way, mass against mass. Fuel burned and thrown out the back like some primitive bonfire. The Corvette had folded space for 400 years. They did not throw mass out the back of anything. So when the human ship Kestrel limped into a border skirmish near the Thren Belt, with one engine trailing plasma and its hull scorched black on one side, the Corvette commander on duty, a mid-ranked officer named Vesh Oralite 9, did not even bother calling for reinforcements. He logged the contact as a probable retreat, ordered 2 light cruisers to finish the kill at their leisure, and went back to reviewing supply reports. The 2 cruisers never made it. The Kestrel turned to face them, and its remaining engine flared not forward, but sideways, and the ship was simply gone. Not exploded, not vaporized. Gone, the way a word disappears when you stop saying it. Half a second later, on the other side of the 2 Corvette cruisers, space folded inward on itself, with a soundless flash of white light, and the Kestrel was there instead, guns already firing into the unshielded rear quarters of both ships. The first cruiser died in 11 seconds. The second tried to run, and lasted 4 minutes longer, which did not help it at all. Vesh Oralite 9 watched the sensor logs 6 times before he believed them. Human ships did not fold space. Human ships could not fold space. The lattice drive was Corvette technology, refined over 4 centuries, understood by perhaps 12,000 living scientists across the entire Dominion, and it required a starship's mass in exotic crystal to generate a stable fold. No human shipyard, by any intelligence report the Dominion possessed, had ever produced crystal lattice in any usable quantity. And yet there it was, a human light cruiser, barely 200 meters of riveted steel and stubborn engineering, had folded space twice in 6 minutes, and killed 2 Corvette warships doing it. Vesh sent the report up the chain with a note attached. Recommend verification, possible sensor ghost, or captured Corvette technology. He did not believe either explanation himself. He simply did not want to be the officer who told Dominion High Command that the primitive apes on the 3rd planet of a nothing yellow star had solved space folding on their own. Using math, the Corvette themselves considered elegant only because they'd had 400 years to make it look that way. 6 months earlier, in a shipyard bolted to the inside of a hollowed-out asteroid called Bellwether Station, a woman named Dr. Priya Okonkwo Chen had been arguing with a man who outranked her. "It's not ready," she said. "I don't care what the timeline says. It's not ready." Admiral Grace Tanaka did not raise her voice. She rarely did. It was one of the things that made her frightening. The Corvette took Aldrin Station 11 days ago. 40,000 people. "We don't have a timeline, Priya. We have a countdown, and I don't know how many numbers are left on it." Priya rubbed her eyes. She was 43 years old and looked 60, because she had not slept properly since the war started going badly, which was to say, since the war started. Behind her, in the vast dry-docked bay of Bellwether Station, sat the reason the 2 women were arguing, a ship unlike any other in the human fleet. Officially it was designated UNS Kestrel, hull number 7, part of the Meridian-class light cruiser line. Unofficially, among the 200 engineers who had spent 3 years of their lives on it, it was called the Frankenstein, because it had been built by stitching together 3 different, mostly incompatible ideas that were never supposed to work in the same hull. The first idea belonged to a Corvette defector, an actual Corvette, blue-skinned, 6-limbed, and utterly bored with his own civilization's 4-century head start, who had handed over a working understanding of lattice drive theory in exchange for asylum and, according to rumor, a genuine curiosity about human cooking. His name, translated roughly, was Seneth Careful with Fire, and he had spent 2 years teaching human physicists why the Corvette fold drive worked the way it did. The second idea belonged to Priya herself. She had looked at the Corvette math, understood it, in about 4 months. which had made Seneth deeply uncomfortable about human intelligence in a way he never fully explained. And then done something the Corvette had never bothered to try in 400 years. She asked why the fold drive needed crystal lattice at all, instead of just being told that it did. The answer, it turned out, was that it didn't. The crystal lattice wasn't fundamental to space folding. It was fundamental to the Corvette's specific method of space folding, a method built on assumptions baked in centuries ago by scientists who had never questioned them, because the method worked well enough. Priya's team, freed of 400 years of institutional certainty, built a fold generator out of superconducting alloy loops and a control system that ran hot, ran loud, and drank more power than a small city. But it worked, and it didn't need a gram of crystal. The third idea belonged to a stubborn, quiet engineer named Marcus Webb, who had pointed out that a fold drive built from human parts, running on human power systems, calibrated by a human control algorithm, was going to behave nothing like a Corvette fold drive in the field. It would need a real ship wrapped around it, not a test rig. It would need a crew who understood it wasn't magic. It was a machine that could kill everyone aboard if it was rushed. Which was exactly what Priya was afraid of. 6 months before the Kestrel limped toward the Thren belt and folded space in front of a Corvette patrol for the first time. If we push it out now, Priya told Admiral Tanaka, with the control algorithm at 80% confidence, we are going to lose a ship. Maybe two. The math on the exit point calculation still drifts by 0.4% on long folds. 0.4% doesn't sound like much, until you remember it's the difference between exiting in open space and exiting inside a moon. I know the numbers, Priya. Then you know what I'm asking you not to do. Admiral Tanaka looked past her, at the ship. It did not look like much. It looked like what it was. A 200-year-old design philosophy wearing a very new, very dangerous heart. The engines along its flanks were standard human fusion torches, honest and reliable and slow. Bolted into what used to be the secondary cargo hold was a fold generator the size of a small house, humming with a sound the engineers had taken to calling the headache, because standing near it for more than 20 minutes gave you one. I'm not asking you to fly it into battle, Tanaka said finally. I'm asking you to let me send it on patrol. Border patrol only. Thren belt sector. Low traffic. If it never has to fold, it never has to fold. But if a Corvette patrol finds it, and it has to run, then it'll have an escape route no Corvette ship can predict, Priya finished. She was quiet for a long moment. 0.4%, Grace. That's my honest answer. 0.4% chance, on any given fold over 10 light seconds, that the exit point calculation puts them somewhere they don't want to be. And if they don't fold, then they're just a slow human cruiser in a war we're losing. Tanaka nodded slowly. Captain Reyes already volunteered. So did the whole crew, when I told them what the ship could do. Priya closed her eyes. Of course they did. Captain Elena Reyes was 36 years old, had been in the fleet for 14 years, and had lost her brother at the Battle of Cassian Reach 18 months earlier, when a Corvette strike group had folded in behind a human convoy and taken it apart, before the escort ships even registered a threat. She did not talk about that much. She did not need to. Everyone on the Kestrel knew, the same way everyone in the fleet knew somebody the Corvette had killed with a trick human ships couldn't answer. That was the thing about the war, 6 years in. It wasn't that humans were weak. Human ships were tough, human crews were disciplined, and human weapons, railguns that threw solid slugs at a meaningful fraction of light speed, plasma lances that could cut through most Corvette armor given enough time, did real damage when they connected. The problem had never been human strength. The problem was human reach. The Corvette could appear anywhere, hit hard, and vanish before a response fleet arrived. Humanity was a species fighting with both hands tied behind its back, throwing good punches at an opponent who simply wasn't standing where the punch landed. Elena stood on the Kestrel's bridge, 3 days before the ship's official first patrol, and looked at her crew doing final systems checks. 22 people. She had chosen most of them herself, and every single one had said yes before she finished explaining what the ship could do. Her XO was a broad-shouldered man named Chief Okafor Lindquist, who had flown fighters before an old injury grounded him to cruiser duty, and who had a habit of humming old jazz standards under his breath when he was nervous, which the whole crew had learned to find either soothing or infuriating depending on the day. Her chief engineer was Marcus Webb himself, who had insisted on shipping out with his own creation, rather than watching it fly from a monitor back at Bellwether. Her sensor officer was a sharp, quiet young woman named Aisha Osei, barely 24, who had scored higher on the fold drive control simulations than anyone else in the fleet, officer or engineer. "Talk to me, Marcus," Elena said, walking down to the engineering deck where Webb was running a diagnostic on the fold generator for what had to be the 100th time. "She's ready," Webb said, not looking up from his console. "As ready as she's going to get without an actual field test. I keep telling Priya that. You can run 1,000 simulations and it's not the same as folding space with real mass and real people inside it." "You scared?" Webb considered the question honestly, which was one of the things Elena liked about him. "Yeah, a little. Mostly I'm scared of doing it wrong, not of doing it at all." "Good answer. What about you, Captain?" Elena looked at the fold generator, humming its low headache hum in the dim engineering light. She thought about her brother, about the convoy, about the Corvette ships that had appeared out of nothing and vanished the same way, leaving nothing behind but wreckage and 11 months of silence where his last transmission should have been. "I've been scared for 18 months, she said. "This is the first thing that's made me feel like we might actually get to hit back." The patrol that followed was, for 11 days, almost boring. The Kestrel cruised the outer edge of the Thrin Belt, a scattered debris field that marked the rough border between human and Corvette space, running standard reconnaissance patterns and reporting nothing more exciting than mineral surveys and the occasional automated Corvette probe, which it dutifully avoided rather than engaged. Then, on the 12th day, a Corvette border patrol, 1 heavy escort and 2 light cruisers, the same class of ship that had ambushed a dozen human convoys over the past year, dropped out of fold space 8 light minutes away and began an intercept course. Aisha Osei called it first. "Captain, we have contact. Corvette signature, 3 ships, fold signature, confirms they just folded in. Intercept course, ETA 14 minutes. Elena felt her pulse pick up, but her voice stayed level. 14 years of training did that for you, whatever your heart was doing underneath. "Options, Chief?" Lindquist studied the tactical plot. "We run for the border on conventional engines. We might make it. Might not. Their fold drive means they can cut us off whenever they want. We stand and fight 3-1. We lose. Bad math either way." "Marcus?" Webb's voice came up from engineering, tight but controlled. "Fold generators hot and ready. I can give you a jump on your mark, Captain. 0.4% drift risk, same as always. I won't pretend that number's gone away." Elena looked at the tactical plot one more time. 3 Corvette ships closing fast, confident, the way the Corvette always were when they thought they held every advantage. She thought about her brother's convoy. She thought about 18 months of silence. "Take us out, Marcus," she said. "Fold us behind the lead cruiser. Let's see how they like a taste of their own trick." The engines flared sideways, space folded, and for the first time in the history of the war, a human warship vanished from where the Corvette expected it to be, and reappeared exactly where they didn't. The fold lasted less than a second, but for Elena Reyes, it felt much longer. There was a strange pulling sensation, like the whole ship had been stretched thin and then snapped back into shape, and then the Kestrel was somewhere else entirely, and the lead Corvette cruiser was directly ahead of them, close enough that its running lights lit up the Kestrel's bridge windows. "Guns free," Elena shouted, and her weapons officer, a stocky man named Petty Officer Dumont, didn't need to be told twice. The Kestrel's railguns opened up, throwing solid slugs into the unshielded rear of the Corvette cruiser, at a meaningful fraction of light speed. Corvette ships were built to survive attacks from the front and sides, where their shields were strongest. Nobody built armor for the back, because nobody had ever been able to get behind a Corvette ship before. The cruiser's aft section came apart in a silent flash of atmosphere and debris. It didn't explode, not the way fiction made explosions look. It just tore, venting its guts into vacuum, drives flickering and dying. The other 2 Corvette ships reacted fast, faster than Elena had expected. A Corvette escort cruiser spun hard and returned fire, and the Kestrel shuddered as plasma lances scored across its shields. Marcus Webb's voice crackled over the comm, tight with strain. "Shields at 70%, Captain. We are not built to trade fire with 3 of them." "We're not going to," Elena said. Marcus, spin up another fold. Same drift tolerance. Get us clear. Give me 8 seconds. 8 seconds, with 2 Corvette warships raking fire across the Kestrel's hull, felt like a lifetime. Elena watched the shield readout drop, 70%, 60, 55, and made herself breathe evenly, the way she'd trained her whole crew to do under fire. Panic made people slow. Slow got people killed. Fold ready, Webb called. Punch it. Space folded again, and the Kestrel vanished from the middle of a losing 3-on-1 fight, and reappeared 4 light minutes away, drifting quietly in the dark. Shields down to 40%, but hull intact. Behind them, the 2 remaining Corvette ships spent several confused minutes scanning empty space for a target that simply wasn't there anymore. On the bridge, nobody spoke for a moment. Then Chief Lindquist let out a slow breath and said, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound casual and mostly succeeding, "Well, that worked." Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. "Get me a damage report, and somebody tell Priya Okonkwo-Chen her drive works exactly the way she said it would." The report of the engagement reached Bellwether Station 9 hours later, and by the time it reached Earth's Unified Command 4 days after that, it had already changed the shape of the war, not in any single dramatic stroke, but the way a small crack changes the shape of a dam. Command had spent 6 years assuming humanity's only path to victory was attrition. Build more ships, lose more ships. Hope the Corvette ran out of patience before humanity ran out of people. The Kestrel's engagement report suggested something else. It suggested a path that didn't depend on losing. Admiral Grace Tanaka read the report twice before calling Priya Okonkwo-Chen into her office. "1 cruiser," Priya said, before Tanaka could speak. "Confirmed kill." And the Kestrel came back with a 40% shield loss, minor hull damage, no casualties. 2 folds in 1 engagement, both within 0.4% drift tolerance. I want that in the record, before anyone starts asking me to skip the next round of safety testing. "Nobody's asking you to skip anything," Tanaka said. "I'm asking you something else. How many more of these can you build, and how fast?" Priya sat down heavily. "That's the real problem, Grace. It's not the drive design anymore. We understand the drive design now, better than the Corvette understand their own, honestly, because we built ours from first principles instead of 4 centuries of assumptions nobody questioned. The problem is scale. Every fold generator we've built so far has been hand-assembled by a team of specialists who've spent 3 years learning this technology inside and out. I can't hand this to a normal shipyard and expect the same quality. How many can you deliver in 6 months? If I strip every resource from every other project at Bellwether, maybe 6. Full cruisers, fully tested, fully crewed." Tanaka absorbed that. "The Corvette have roughly 4,000 warships in their standing fleet, Priya. 6 ships isn't going to win a war." "No," Priya agreed, "but 6 ships that can appear anywhere, without warning, and hit anything from any angle. That's not about winning a war of attrition. That's about making the Corvette afraid of a fight they've never had to be afraid of before. Fear changes strategy. Fear makes commanders cautious. Cautious commanders make mistakes." There was a long silence. "I need you to build me more than 6, Tanaka said finally. "I need you to build me a program. Training doctrine, manufacturing pipeline, everything. Because I think the Kestrel just proved something bigger than 1 lucky engagement. And if the Corvette figure out what we've built before we're ready to use it at scale, they'll adapt, and we'll have burned our 1 real advantage on a border skirmish." Priya thought about the 22 people aboard the Kestrel, about Marcus Webb's careful diagnostics, and Elena Reyes's steady voice in the after-action report. About 6 months of arguing over 0.4% drift tolerance, while people died in convoys the fleet couldn't protect fast enough. "Give me everything Bellwether has," she said. "And give me the Kestrel's crew as instructors. If we're going to build a program, I want the people who've actually flown this thing teaching everyone who comes after them." Word of the engagement did not stay contained to Unified Command for long. Within 2 weeks, every human ship in the fleet had heard some version of the story. A lot of the details wrong, most of the important parts right. A human cruiser had folded space. A human cruiser had killed a Corvette warship from behind. In a maneuver the Corvette themselves had spent 4 centuries assuming no other species could replicate. Morale, which had been sinking steadily for 6 years, ticked upward for the first time anyone could remember. Elena Reyes found the attention uncomfortable. She was not, by her own accounting, a hero. She had given an order, and a very good engineer had executed a very good design, and the outcome had been one dead Corvette cruiser, and a lot of relief that nobody on her crew had died doing it. But she understood, in the quiet moments between patrols, why the story mattered to people who weren't aboard the Kestrel. For 6 years, humanity had been playing a game the Corvette designed and always won. Now, for the first time, there was a move on the board that the Corvette hadn't planned for. She spent the weeks after the engagement doing exactly what Priya had asked, teaching. New crews rotated through Bellwether Station in a steady stream, and Elena, Webb, Lindquist, and Osei walked them through everything. The physics, so far as any of them fully understood it, the tactics, the mistakes they'd made, and the ones they'd been lucky enough to avoid. Webb was particularly insistent on one point, drilled into every new engineering crew until it became something like scripture aboard the growing Fold fleet. "This is not magic," he'd say, standing in front of a training mock-up of a Fold generator. "It is a machine. Machines fail. This one fails in a specific way. A drift in the exit point calculation, currently sitting at 0.4% per Fold over standard combat ranges. That number is not zero. It will never be zero. Anyone who tells you it's safe is lying to you. And anyone who tells you it's not worth the risk has never had to run from 3 Corvette cruisers with no other way out." Meanwhile, on the other side of the border, the Corvette Dominion was having a very different kind of meeting. High Marshal Corvain Ashwin Prime, commander of the 3rd Thren Fleet and one of the most senior military officers in the entire Dominion, sat at the head of a long crystal table aboard the Dominion capital ship Endless Certainty and listened to a junior intelligence officer explain, for the 3rd time, why the destruction of a light cruiser at the Thren Belt border was not a sensor error. "The wreckage was recovered," the officer said. "Fold signature residue confirms 2 folds within a 6-minute window. Human hull, human weapon signatures on the kill shot. There is no reasonable alternative explanation, High Marshal." Corvain Ashwin Prime had lived 140 Dominion years, had commanded fleets in 3 separate border conflicts, and had never once, in all that time, felt the particular unease now settling into his chest. The Dominion's entire strategic doctrine, for 400 years, rested on a simple and unshakable truth. The lattice drive belonged to the Corvette. Every species the Dominion had ever encountered, conquered, absorbed, or dismissed, had been slower, blinder, and less mobile than a Corvette fleet. That asymmetry was not an advantage among many advantages. It was the foundation everything else was built on. "Recommendation," he said. The intelligence officer hesitated, which told Corvain everything he needed to know before the answer came. "We do not know how many of these ships the humans possess, or how quickly they can build more." Conservative assumption: this is an experimental prototype, likely limited in number, possibly unreliable. Aggressive assumption: this is the first of a fleet-wide capability shift, and every human warship built from this point forward may possess similar technology. And if the aggressive assumption is correct, then the Dominion's core strategic advantage, the assumption that we control the terms of every engagement, no longer holds. High Marshal, with respect, I do not believe this is a matter for a single fleet commander's judgment. I believe this belongs at the Grand Assembly. Corvain was quiet for a long moment, looking at the crystal table's reflection of the stars outside, a view of Corvette space, ancient and settled and, until 11 days ago, entirely secure. "Send the report to the Grand Assembly," he said finally. "And send a second message, privately, to Fleet Marshal Thrennick Orelite, Vesh's uncle, the one who commands the home fleet muster at Cordovain. Tell him what we've learned. Tell him to increase capital fleet security protocols, regardless of what the Assembly decides. If the humans have solved Fold Drive independently, I do not intend to be the officer remembered for assuming they wouldn't use it against the one target that would actually matter." The intelligence officer looked confused. "The one target, High Marshal?" Corvain's expression did not change, but something in his 6 eyes went distant, calculating 4 centuries of unquestioned assumptions, and finding, for the first time, a crack running straight through the middle of them. "The capital fleet muster," he said. "Every flagship in the Dominion, gathered in one place, for the Ascension ceremony in 4 months' time. If I were commanding the human fleet, and I had just proven I could fold a warship behind enemy lines undetected. That is exactly where I would want to strike. Not a border skirmish. The heart. He did not know, in that moment, how right he was. 4 months passed, and in that time the Kestrel stopped being an experiment and became something closer to a promise. Bellwether Station worked around the clock. Priya Okonkwo-Chen slept in her office more nights than not, running her small army of engineers through a punishing schedule that produced, by the end of the 4th month, 11 fold-capable warships instead of the 6 she had first promised Admiral Tanaka. They weren't all cruisers. 2 were smaller, faster corvettes, built to test whether the fold generator could be miniaturized. 1 was larger, a modified destroyer with double the power capacity, built to test whether the drift tolerance could be improved with more computing power behind the exit point calculation. It could. Barely. 0.4% came down to 0.31, which Priya considered a triumph, and Marcus Webb considered, still not something I'd bet my life on without a backup plan. The Kestrel's crew, meanwhile, had become the closest thing the human fleet had to celebrities, a status none of them particularly wanted. Elena Reyes gave exactly 1 press interview, found the experience deeply unpleasant, and declined every request after that. She preferred the training rotations, where the questions were technical instead of personal, and where she could talk about drift tolerances and fold geometry instead of her brother. It was during one of these rotations, in the 3rd month, that Aisha Osei brought something to Elena's attention that would end up mattering more than either of them understood at the time. "Captain, I've been running long-range fold signature analysis on Corvette fleet movements," Aisha said, pulling up a display in the Kestrel's small briefing room. "Since our engagement at the Thren Belt, something's changed. Corvette patrol density along the border has increased about 30%. That's expected. They know we have the tech now, they're being cautious. But look at this." She pulled up a second set of data, sourced from long-range sensor drones scattered along the border in the months since the engagement. Deep in Corvette territory, past the border zone entirely, there's a fold signature pattern building. Dozens of capital-class ships, all converging on a single system. Cordovain. It's the location of the Dominion's home fleet muster point. Has been for as long as we've had intelligence on it. A build-up for an offensive? Elena asked. That's what Command thinks, and it's possible. But the timing's strange. Our intelligence analysts cross-referenced it against Corvette cultural data we've picked up over the years, and there's a ceremony, they call it the Ascension Ceremony, held roughly every generation, where the entire capital fleet gathers in one place. Flagships, command ships, the Dominion's most senior military and political leadership, all in one system for a period of about 2 weeks. It's part military review, part political theater. Every 400 years or so, near as we can tell, they've done this. Elena studied the fold signature cluster on the display, an ever-growing knot of Corvette capital ships converging on a single point in space. How many ships, total, by the time this ceremony happens? Estimates vary, but the pattern suggests somewhere between 80 and 120 capital-class vessels, including, almost certainly, the Dominion's flagship, the Endless Certainty, and most of their senior fleet command structure. The room was quiet for a moment. "That's not a target," Lindquist said slowly, from where he'd been listening near the door. "That's the whole war, sitting in one place." The proposal reached Admiral Tanaka's desk 2 days later, and she did not sleep the night she read it. It was, on its face, an insane idea. A single human ship, or, at most, a small strike group, folding directly into the heart of the most heavily defended location in Corvette space, surrounded by the entire capital fleet of an empire that had ruled its region of the galaxy for 400 years. Every simulation Bellwether's tactical team ran gave the mission a survival probability under 15%. Most gave it under 10. And yet, Tanaka called a meeting with her senior staff, with Priya Okonkwo-Chen attending remotely from Bellwether, and laid the idea out plainly. If our intelligence is correct, the Corvette are about to gather nearly every flagship and senior commander they have into a single system, for roughly 2 weeks, as part of a ceremonial tradition they have followed for 4 centuries without a single serious external threat during that window. They have never needed to fear an attack during the Ascension ceremony, because no species they've ever fought has had the reach to threaten their home system, let alone the heart of their capital fleet. "Until now," said General Okonkwo, No relation to Priya, the head of Unified Command Strategic Planning Division. Until now, Tanaka agreed. I want to be clear about what I'm proposing, because it is not a rescue mission, and it is not a conventional strike. I am proposing we send a small strike group, the Kestrel and 2 of the newer corvettes, the Peregrine and the Osprey, on a mission to fold directly into the Coeur d'Alene muster point during the ceremony window, inflict maximum damage on capital ships and command infrastructure, and fold back out before the corvette's numerical superiority becomes decisive. That's not a battle, someone said. That's a raid into the mouth of the beast. Yes, Tanaka said simply. It is exactly that, and I want to be honest with everyone in this room about why I think it's worth the risk. This war has ground on for 6 years, because the Corvette control the terms of every engagement. They choose where, they choose when, and they always have an exit strategy we can't match. This mission flips that. For 2 weeks, we would know exactly where their entire senior command structure is gathered, and they would have no idea we were coming, until we were already inside their formation. Priya's voice came through the comm, tight with something between excitement and dread. I need to say this clearly, Grace, because I think it matters more than anything else in this room. The drift tolerance on the Kestrel's fold generator is 0.4%. On the newer corvettes, 0.31. Folding into the middle of 100-plus capital ships means the margin for error is smaller than it has ever been on any mission we've run. A drift of even a fraction of a percent could put a human ship inside the hull of a corvette flagship instead of beside it. I am not going to pretend that risk doesn't exist. Understood, Tanaka said. Which is why this has to be a volunteer mission. Every crew member, no exceptions, no pressure. If we ask, and even one person says no, we respect that, and find someone else. She did not need to ask twice. When word reached the Kestrel's crew that evening, every single one of them volunteered, before Elena had finished explaining the mission parameters. The 2 months of preparation that followed were the most intense of Elena Reyes's career. Bellwether's engineering teams stripped the Kestrel, the Peregrine, and the Osprey down to their frames and rebuilt them with every improvement Priya's team had developed since the Threnbelt engagement. Reinforced shielding tuned specifically against Corvette capital ship weapon signatures, improved fold generator cooling systems to allow faster successive folds, and a new tactical computer system designed by Aisha Osei herself, meant to calculate optimal fold exit points inside a dense, moving formation of enemy ships in real time. Marcus Webb barely left engineering for 6 weeks straight, running diagnostic after diagnostic on the Kestrel's fold generator, refusing to certify the ship ready until he'd personally verified every connection twice. If we're doing this, he told Elena, I want it on record that I checked everything a sane person would check, and then I checked it again for the people who might not come back if I missed something. Seneth Careful with Fire, the Corvette defector whose original theoretical work had made the whole program possible, was brought in as a special consultant during the final planning phase. He sat through briefing after briefing with an expression humans had learned, over 2 years of working alongside him, to read as something like grim fascination. You understand, he said, during one late planning session, that no one has ever done this, not to us. Not to anyone, in the history of the Dominion. We built the lattice drive assuming it made us untouchable at the moments that mattered most. I do not know what my people will do when that assumption breaks. I do not think they know either. Is that a warning? Elena asked. It is an observation, Seneth said. The Corvette are not stupid, Captain Reyes. When they are frightened, they do not panic. They escalate, decisively and completely. If you succeed in this mission, you will not simply damage their fleet. You will damage their understanding of what is possible. I do not know what a 400-year-old empire does when its oldest certainty is proven false in the span of a single afternoon. I suspect neither do they. Elena thought about that for a long time after the meeting ended. She thought about her brother, and the convoy, and 18 months of silence. She thought about the 22 people under her command who had said yes without hesitation, and the crews of the Peregrine and Osprey who had done the same. 2 weeks before the ascension ceremony was set to begin, Aisha Osei's long-range sensor drones confirmed it. The Corvette capital fleet had finished its muster at Coeur d'Alene. 94 capital-class warships, including the Dominion flagship Endless Certainty, sat gathered in a single system, arranged in the ceremonial formation the Corvette had used for 400 years. utterly certain that nothing in the galaxy could reach them there. Set the launch for 0600, 3 days from now, Admiral Tanaka said, when the final go order came through. Elena, I won't pretend I'm not afraid for you and your crews, but I believe this is the mission that changes the war. I believe in you. Thank you, Admiral, Elena said. We won't waste it. 3 days later, in the cold dark of Bellwether Station's launch bay, the Kestrel, the Peregrine, and the Osprey powered up their fold generators, aimed themselves at a point in space no human ship had ever dared approach, and prepared to do something the Corveth Dominion had spent 400 years believing was impossible. The fold to Cordovain was the longest the Kestrel's crew had ever attempted, nearly 40 light-years, calculated across 3 separate jump points to keep the drift error from compounding into something catastrophic. Marcus Webb spent the entire approach sequence with his hands hovering over the engineering console, watching numbers that meant the difference between arriving in open space and arriving inside a star. Final jump in 60 seconds, Aisha OC called from her station. Exit point calculated for the outer edge of the Cordovain formation, near the Dominion Supply and Logistics Cluster, drift tolerance holding at 0.32%. Elena Reyes stood at the center of the Kestrel's bridge, flanked on her tactical display by the icons of the Peregrine and the Osprey, both holding formation a few thousand kilometers off her flanks. She keyed the comm to all 3 ships. This is Reyes. I know everyone's run the numbers more times than they can count. I'm not going to give a speech. I'm going to say one thing. 6 years ago, the Corveth taught us what it feels like to be helpless. Today we remind them what it feels like to be surprised. Fold on my mark. Mark, Aisha said. Space folded 3 times, in 3 different locations, a few thousand kilometers apart, and for the first time in 400 years, the Corveth Dominion's home fleet muster had uninvited guests. The Cordovain system, in the moments before the fold, looked exactly the way it had looked for 400 years of ascension ceremonies, serene, orderly, and utterly secure. 94 capital-class Corveth warships hung in a formation shaped like a great slow-turning flower, flagships at the center, escort and support vessels arranged in concentric rings outward. Thousands of Corveth crew went about ceremonial duties, honor guards drilled on hangar decks, and senior officers from every corner of the Dominion gathered aboard the Endless Certainty for the formal proceedings that would begin in 2 days' time. High Marshal Corvain Ashwin Prime stood on the Endless Certainty's observation deck, looking out at the formation his people had built over 4 centuries, and felt, for the first time in weeks, something like reassurance. Security protocols had been doubled, on his own orders, since the Threnbelt engagement. Sensor sweeps ran continuously. Every ship in the formation had been briefed on the possibility, however remote it seemed, of a human incursion. None of it mattered. 3 human ships appeared inside the formation's outer ring, in the space of a single second, and every sensor operator in the Corveth fleet spent a full 3 seconds simply failing to process what they were seeing, because nothing in 400 years of Corveth naval doctrine had prepared anyone for the sight of enemy ships materializing from nowhere, already inside the perimeter, weapons already charged. The Kestrel, the Peregrine, and the Osprey opened fire in the same breath. They did not attack the largest ships first. That had been Elena's decision during the final planning sessions, over Seneth careful with Fire's mild objection that the flagship represented the most valuable target. The flagship is the most defended target, Elena had told him. We're not here to win a stand-up fight against 94 capital ships. We're here to cause maximum chaos in minimum time and get out. That means logistics. That means command relay stations. That means anything that turns this formation from an organized fleet into a panicked crowd. The Kestrel's first target was a Corveth logistics carrier, packed with fuel and munitions for the entire muster fleet. Its railguns tore through the carrier's unshielded flank, and the resulting secondary explosion, fuel and ordnance catching in a chain reaction, lit up the Cordovain system like a second sun, and sent a shockwave of debris tearing through 3 nearby escort ships before anyone aboard them understood what had happened. The Peregrine struck the fleet's central communications relay ship, a vessel whose sole purpose was coordinating orders between the 94 capital ships in the formation. Without it, ships that had operated as a single coordinated fleet for the entire muster suddenly found themselves cut off from central command, forced to rely on local initiative in a doctrine that had never prized local initiative, because the lattice drive and the relay network had always made centralized command fast enough that it never needed to. The Osprey hit a squadron of Corvette strike craft carriers, catching their fighter wings still docked and unlaunched, destroying the Dominion's fastest and most maneuverable response force before it ever left the hangar bays. In the space of 90 seconds, 3 human ships had inflicted more damage on the Corvette home fleet than any engagement in the entire 6-year war. Aboard the Endless Certainty, High Marshal Corvain Ashwin Prime watched his tactical display fill with red icons: ships destroyed, ships damaged, ships suddenly and inexplicably unable to receive orders, and felt the particular, specific horror of a commander watching 4 centuries of doctrine fail in real time. "Status," he barked, and for the first time in his 140 years of service, he heard genuine fear in the voice of the officer who answered. "High Marshal, we have lost the Providence unbroken logistics carrier, the central relay ship Voice of the Assembly, and at least 4 escort vessels to secondary damage. Fighter carrier Swift Resolve reports total loss of strike craft capability. We cannot confirm total hostile numbers. Sensors show only 3-fold signatures, but damage patterns suggest." 3 ships, Corvain said. 3. He looked at the tactical display again, at the chaos spreading through a formation that had never, in 400 years, needed a contingency plan for an enemy already inside its perimeter. Ships were breaking formation, some moving to engage the 3 human vessels, others simply moving away from the chaos, in the absence of central coordination, colliding with each other's flight paths in the confusion. "Order every ship within engagement range to converge on the hostile contacts," he said. "And get me a fold signature lock on those ships. If they folded in, they can fold out, and I want every gun in this system tracking them the moment they try." On the Kestrel's bridge, the chaos was, if anything, more intense than the calm planning sessions back at Bellwether had prepared anyone for. The ship rocked under incoming fire as Corvette escort vessels, recovering from the initial shock, began converging on their position. Shields dropped from full to 60% in the span of a single exchange. "Captain, we've got 6 ships closing on an intercept vector," Aisha called out, her voice tight but controlled. Peregrine reports similar numbers. Ospreys taking heavy fire. They hit the fighter carrier hard, but they're exposed. "Marcus, status on the fold generator?" Cooling down from the arrival jump, Webb's voice came back, strained. "I need 4 more minutes before I can guarantee a clean fold-out. Push it sooner, and the drift tolerance goes from 0.3 to something I genuinely can't predict." "We don't have 4 minutes," Lindquist said grimly, watching the tactical display fill with converging Corvette ships. Elena made the decision in half a second, the way 14 years of training had taught her to. "Then we buy Marcus his 4 minutes. Dumont, concentrate fire on the nearest escort. Take it out before it can bring its full broadside to bear. Osei, get me a tight beam to the Osprey and Peregrine. Tell them to converge on our position and form a defensive triangle. We hold, we cover Marcus, and the second that generator's ready, we all fold out together." "And if we can't hold 4 minutes?" Lindquist asked, quietly, so only she could hear. Elena looked at the tactical display. 3 small human ships, surrounded on all sides by a fleet built and refined over 400 years. Every gun, in an entire empire's home fleet, slowly turning toward them. "Then we make sure the 4 minutes cost them everything we've got," she said. "Signal the Peregrine and Osprey. We're not running yet. We're finishing what we started." The 3 human ships pulled together into a tight defensive formation at the heart of a fleet that had never once, in 4 centuries, faced an enemy who could reach them where they lived. And for 4 minutes, that felt like 4 lifetimes, they fought. The 4 minutes were the longest of Elena Reyes's life, and she would remember every second of them for the rest of it. The Kestrel, the Peregrine, and the Osprey pulled into a tight defensive triangle at the heart of the Cordovain formation, shields overlapping to cover each other's weak points, weapons officers firing in coordinated bursts, calculated by Aisha Osei's tactical computer, to concentrate damage on the most threatening incoming ships first. It was not a fair fight. It was never going to be a fair fight. 3 ships against dozens, in the heart of an empire's home fleet, was not a battle any of them expected to walk away from clean. But it was, for those 4 minutes, a fight the Corvette had never trained for. 400 years of Dominion naval doctrine assumed centralized command, coordinated strikes, Overwhelming numbers deployed with the confidence of a species that had never needed to fight defensively in its own territory. With the relay ship voice of the assembly destroyed and the fleet's central coordination shattered, Corveth captains found themselves making individual decisions in real time, without the network of instant orders they had relied on for their entire careers. Some charged in recklessly and paid for it. Others hesitated, waiting for orders that would never come, and lost the initiative entirely. The overwhelming numerical advantage that should have crushed 3 human ships in seconds instead unfolded in a series of uncoordinated, disorganized attacks that the human tactical computer, built specifically to exploit exactly this kind of chaos, picked apart one at a time. "Shields at 30%, Osei called out, 20 seconds before Webb's 4 minutes were up. Osprey reports shields failing. Hull breach in secondary compartment. Hold formation, Elena shouted back. Marcus, talk to me. 10 seconds. Webb's voice was ragged, half-shouted over the sound of alarms in engineering. 9, 8. The Kestrel took a direct hit across its port shields, and the whole ship groaned with the impact, lights flickering, a console somewhere on the bridge sparking and dying. Elena grabbed the arm of her chair to stay upright and kept her eyes on the tactical display, watching the countdown Webb had given her tick toward 0. 3, 2, fold is ready, Webb shouted. Captain, say the word. All ships, fold now, Elena called into the tight beam comm. Fold now, fold now. Space folded 3 times, in 3 positions across the chaos of the Cordovane formation, and the 3 human ships that had spent 4 minutes tearing the heart out of the Dominion's home fleet simply vanished, leaving behind burning wreckage, a shattered command structure, and 91 surviving capital ships that had just watched everything they believed about their own security collapse in less than 5 minutes. The Kestrel reappeared in open space, 11 light-years from Cordovane, shields at 9%, 3 crew members in the medical bay with injuries from the final exchange of fire, and every single person aboard alive. The Peregrine arrived 30 seconds later, damaged but intact. The Osprey took 4 minutes longer than either of the other 2 ships to complete its fold, and for those 4 minutes, Elena Reyes stood on the Kestrel's bridge and did not breathe easily, watching an empty patch of space where a friendly ship was supposed to appear and hadn't. When the Osprey finally folded in, hull breached, 1 engine dead, half its crew in medical distress but every name still accounted for. The whole bridge crew of the Kestrel let out a breath they'd been holding collectively for what felt like an hour. All ships, report status, Elena said, her voice hoarse. Peregrine here, Captain. Damaged but combat capable. All crew accounted for. Osprey here. The voice was strained, exhausted. We lost an engine, and we've got wounded, but we're all still breathing. Ma'am, we hit them. We really hit them. Elena sat down slowly in her command chair, the adrenaline of the last 20 minutes finally beginning to drain out of her, leaving something that felt less like triumph and more like the deep, bone-tired relief of having survived something she had genuinely not expected to survive. Set course for Bellwether Station, she said, slow and careful. Nobody push their systems any harder than they need to be pushed. We got our people home. That's the mission complete. The aftermath of the Cordovane raid reshaped the war in ways no single battle before it ever had. For the Corveth Dominion, the damage was not merely material, though the material damage was severe. The destruction of a major logistics carrier, a central relay ship, an entire fighter carrier's strike wing, and 4 escort vessels, along with damage to a dozen more ships in the chaotic aftermath. The deeper wound was to something the Dominion had never had to question in 400 years, the certainty that their home territory, and above all their capital fleet muster, was beyond the reach of any enemy they had ever faced. High Marshal Corvain Ashwin Prime stood before the Grand Assembly 6 weeks after the attack and gave a report that no Dominion officer had ever had to give before, an accounting of how 3 enemy ships had entered the most secure location in Corveth space, inflicted catastrophic damage, and escaped, all without the Dominion's overwhelming numerical superiority ever translating into a decisive counterstrike. We built our doctrine on an assumption, he told the Assembly, in words that would be quoted, argued over, and eventually taught in Dominion military academies for the rest of the war. We assumed that reach belonged to us alone. We assumed that no species could threaten us where we felt safest, because none ever had. That assumption is no longer true, and every strategy built upon it must now be reconsidered. The Dominion's response, in the months that followed, was neither the panic Seneth careful with fire had once warned of, nor the swift collapse some in unified command had hoped for. It was something more complicated. A Dominion forced, for the first time in 4 centuries, to treat humanity not as a slower, more primitive species to be managed and eventually absorbed, but as a genuine strategic threat, capable of striking anywhere, at any time, without warning. Corveth fleet doctrine shifted toward distributed command structures, redundant relay networks, and defensive protocols that no longer assumed distance, and superior numbers were sufficient protection on their own. It did not end the war. Wars built on 6 years of grief and loss on both sides did not end because of a single raid, however audacious, but it changed the shape of the fight. Human fold-capable ships, though still few in number, became a genuine deterrent, a reason for Corveth commanders to think twice before committing to engagements they once would have entered without hesitation. And Bellwether Station's production lines, fed by lessons learned in the fires of Cordovain, continued turning out new ships, faster and more reliable with every generation. Elena Reyes stood on the observation deck of the newly repaired Kestrel, 6 months after the Cordovain raid, watching Bellwether Station's shipyard below, no longer a single desperate experiment, but a genuine production line, a dozen fold-capable warships in various stages of construction, crewed by volunteers who had grown up, in the space of less than a year, hearing the story of 3 human ships that had jumped into the heart of an empire and come home again. Marcus Webb joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and handed her one without a word. Priya says the drift tolerance on the new generators is down to 0.18%, he said eventually, half of what we had at Cordovain. Good, Elena said. Means the next crew that has to do something like this will have better odds than we did. You think there'll be a next time? Elena looked out at the ships under construction, at the quiet, steady work of an entire species learning to fight back after 6 years of feeling helpless. She thought about her brother, and the convoy, and the 18 months of silence that had once felt like it would never end. She thought about High Marshal Corvain Ashwin Prime's report to the Grand Assembly, which Dominion intelligence intercepts had eventually confirmed word for word, an admission that everything the Corveth had once believed about their own safety had turned out to be wrong. I think, she said slowly, that for 6 years, the Corveth thought our ships were primitive, slow, not worth taking seriously, until it was too late to matter. And I think, for the rest of this war, they're going to remember exactly what happened, the one time they let themselves believe that. Below them, in the vast dry-docked bays of Bellwether Station, the next generation of human warships continued taking shape. Quieter now, sleeker, built not from desperation but from hard-won confidence, waiting for the day they, too, would prove that a species once dismissed as primitive had learned, in the end, exactly how to fight back.